Hi everyone and welcome back. I am Jenny and today we are going to talk about clinical supervision. So we're going to look at, in general, supervision, what goes into that, and I'm also going to share some nuances that I think are more specific to folks that are in school counseling when you're wanting to get clinical supervision. A reminder that I am trained as a therapist and as a clinical supervisor, but for the purposes of this video, all the other videos, and the channel in general, I'm not a therapist or a supervisor to you as a viewer, just somebody hoping to be helpful and give you information that you can use to your benefit. And if you are finding that this information is helpful and you are benefiting from it, please like, subscribe, and share it so that other people can find it as well. So let's just get right into clinical supervision. It is a requirement no matter what state you're wanting to practice in. And while it can be fairly time consuming, for example, a lot of places will require that you take at least 2 years to get your supervision. It's also really rewarding and very valuable. It's a time where you get to think about what you want to learn, how you want to grow in your practice, and get support from somebody that has the right kind of training and background, experience that can really help you to learn the skills, the modalities, how to work with certain populations, whatever it is that might be interesting and exciting for you. You get to actually find somebody and tailor your training to your skills, your needs, your hopes and dreams. So I think it's pretty cool in that way. I will say for me, I didn't know what I wanted to do with the license once I got it. And so I think a lot of folks might be in that boat. You went to school, you got your degree, you're doing things in schools. Now what? If you're going to go into doing something with private practice, I'll have another video that's going to help folks to narrow down your options and what you might want to really focus in on. And then you can use that to help find supervisors that are going to really meet your needs. So whatever kind of supervision you end up getting, you're going to want to make sure that you keep track of all the times that you meet with your supervisor and how many hours you are collecting of basically your practice time, working with clients, filling out notes, and going to conferences and different things. You're going to keep track of all of that. You're going to put it on a form of some sort that you will turn in with your license. And then you're also going to want to get your supervisor to fill that form out. They have to sign a certain part of it, and sometimes there's other requirements that go into it as well. I'm going to take us through more of an example of what a form looks like, and I'm also going to show you information from the legal source where things come from in terms of the requirements for supervision. And this is specific to Colorado, just to use as an example. You can follow along even if you're in a different state, and it should give you a sense for what you're looking for at whatever state you're trying to get licensed in. And then we're going to look at some other information about getting a supervisor that will be more broad and just kind of relevant to everybody. Here we can see, and I'll leave a link for this for you all. This includes the instructions and just the form that you will fill out when you are wanting to show in this case, the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies, that you have completed your supervision hours towards getting your license to be a therapist. So here you can see it's got some of the information that you're going to want to keep in mind. And then it talks about supervised experience. This is going to be specific to those clinical hours as opposed to the supervision hours. There's also a link here for the legal source, and we're going to look at that in just a minute. And then there's this note here that talks about how your supervision hours may not be counted if you do not have, in our case, an LPCC. However, if you're working in a public school, you are exempt from that. And like I said before, I will give my supervisees credit for the work that they're doing in public schools, but I still expect them to get their LPCC and do some clinical work at some point as well. So that's just me. You may be able to find someone that won't have that expectation. Then there's the actual form, and again, you can see what it has on it. There's the information that you will provide at the top. That's pretty self-explanatory. And then the supervision information. So you can look and see all of the verbiage that they talk about there. Basically, you're going to put, it tells you once again, as we've already talked about, 2,000 hours that you're going to need to have of clinical hours that's spent with clients or working on behalf of clients, doing notes, getting trainings, going to conferences, that kind of thing. You can also include 300 hours if you taught classes that would fit for what the state allows. And then you're going to put, when did you start your supervision? When did you end your supervision? The number of supervision hours, which needs to equal 100. And then you can say whether or not it includes teaching. And then if yes, you're going to have to say more information about the courses that you've taught. The total post-degree supervised experience hours are where you're going to need to have at least 2,000. And then you're going to put the supervisor information here, and you may have to either look up their license information or just have them fill that out. Here you can see you need to put the state where you did the experience and the hours per month. And then you're going to have this attestation at the end where you and your supervisor are going to sign. And then that's the thing that you need to turn in along with all your other documentation to, in this case, Dora, in order to get your license. There was a link that we just saw in the supervision form that talks about laws, and that'll take you here to the Rules, Regulations, Practice Act, and Laws. And I've already pulled up the pertinent information here: Colorado Revised Statutes, Title 12, Professions and Occupations. So I will leave links to all this information for folks to take a look at. One piece that I want to highlight is on page 17 of this legal document. You can see near the top of the page information on exemptions. And if you go a little ways down, you're going to see information specific to public schools, that public schools are exempt. And I have taken the time to talk with Dora specifically and got their answer back that part of what this exemption means is that you do not need to have an LPCC in order to count your supervision hours that you're doing in a public school. Here on page 63, we get to part 6, which is specifically about licensed professional counselors, which is what school counselors wanting to be therapists and get licensed would be going for. That would be the license type that you would be going for. And you can go through lots of different components here to find out more. On page 65 in particular, it talks about supervision. And here you can see where it talks about how you need to have at least 2,000 hours and at least 1,500 needs to be direct client contact hours, as opposed to just writing notes or going to a conference or that kind of thing. And then this next part talks about the supervision hours that you need. You need 50 hours of supervision per 1,000 hours of practice or clinical hours. And a minimum of 25 of the 50 hours needs to be individual. So that ends up shaking down to 100 supervision hours total for the 2,000 hours, and 50 of those 100 hours would need to be individual. The rest can be group or triadic. And then if you did do a group, just to know that the group needs to be no more than 10 supervisees for one supervisor. So that's a little bit about the more nuts and bolts in Colorado. So now back to the content that is relevant for everyone, no matter what state you're in. What do you want to look for in a supervisor? And of course, this will depend on your preferences, but I'll tell you a few things that I wish I had looked for in a supervisor. As I've said before, I did not go and get any kind of clinical experience when I was doing supervision. I just did my regular school job, and I had several supervisors that I worked with, and I talked with them about what I was doing in the school. It was very helpful. And when I went out to go and be a therapist with adults, I was not prepared for that. So I think what I would do differently, if I had it to do over again, would be to find a clinical supervisor that was doing private practice themselves and would be able to walk me through all the ins and outs of here's how you set up a business, kind of what I needed to do to kind of hone in on my skills and my practice as a clinician. A lot of the things that I'm trying to touch on in these YouTube videos are meant to provide you some of that information that I wish I had gotten, but had to kind of find a different way. I'm hoping to make it easier for you. So, of course, it's going to be personalized. Every one of us is going to need certain things depending on just who we are, how long it's been since we got trained and went through our master's programs and things like that. But definitely for me, I needed practice. I needed to be working as a clinician, and probably would have benefited from having a supervisor who would have made me videotape myself doing sessions and then bring those in to our supervision times and actually look together at what was I doing and pause the video and at different points and talk about, okay, here this was happening, what do you think about that? Now that you can kind of step back and look at it from a distance, that would have helped me a lot. And I am doing that now with some consultants. So it can kind of make you cringe a lot of times to watch ourselves on video, but it ends up being such a powerful way to really kind of learn and grow as a clinician. And I just think that is super valuable. I really, really needed that when I was first starting out as a therapist working with adults, because it's one way to really build self-confidence, and that was something that I was lacking for a while. So I definitely would recommend considering that for yourselves, even if you are exempt and don't technically have to go and get clinical experience to get your therapist license. I highly recommend doing it anyways, just because of how it can help get you prepared for what you might do in the future. And if you're going to be in supervision anyways, I think you get more bang for your buck by doing that. I think I probably would have also wanted to talk to a supervisor about some of the nuts and bolts around things like, hey, who do you use to help with legal questions, and how do you make sure that you're in compliance with HIPAA, and what are the basic kind of forms. And then I think I also would want to be able to learn and get supervision around the modalities of treatment that I personally love to use, which is EMDR and emotionally focused therapy. Those are two of the bigger ones. I also got trained in dialectical behavior therapy, which is great. I think for my personality, I tend to use that one less, and CBT less, but definitely I think if I could do it over again and have the benefit of getting to have a supervisor that would be just there for me and help me to learn these kind of skills that I would want to know, it would be someone that does EMDR and EFT and could help me with just private practice in general. I think there's a lot of different supervision styles, and again, for me, I think I would have benefited from someone who is pretty kind of matter of fact about using videotapes and really digging in there that way and being pretty specific and going pretty deep into the clinical skills. I think that would have benefited me. Other questions that you might want to find out about is, how many hours of supervision do I need? How much is it going to cost? And how do I find a supervisor? So I think those are all really great questions. And of course it will depend a bit on where you are, what your situation is, but in general, here's some guidelines for you. You're going to need a certain number of clinical hours under supervision, and these are going to be the hours that you are spending with your clients or working on behalf of your clients. Depending on your state, you're going to be allowed a certain number of clinical hours that can be spent writing notes, taking classes, going to conferences, things like that. And then the rest of those clinical hours are going to be spent in face-to-face working with clients. So in Colorado, public school employees are exempt from certain requirements. And I talked a little bit about that earlier. So this is part of what allows them to count the work that they're doing in schools as clinical hours without having to do anything outside of that. I recommend against this, and the supervisees that I am working with as a clinical supervisor, I am asking them to go ahead and get their pre-licensed credential, so the LPCC in Colorado, and I'm asking them to go ahead and get some clinical experience outside of working in schools. And I just think that this then can be very beneficial in the long run. However, I am still counting their work that they're doing in schools towards those clinical hours. And we do spend some time talking about what's going on in schools and how some of the clinical work can be applied to what they're doing there. But I just don't want for them to end up in the place that I was, where they didn't get the clinical experience and then they go out later and try to do it. I want them to be really prepared for starting private practice, and so that's why I just really ask for them to get those clinical experiences on top of what they're doing in schools, even though what they're doing in schools also is going to be counted towards their clinical hours. And the bulk of the supervision hours that I provide are really focused in on the clinical side and less so on the school side. And that's just my preference and, kind of what I'm passionate about based on my past experiences. So you can count on somewhere between probably 2,000 and 3,000 hours that you're going to need for clinical hours. And it depends again on the state, but I know for Washington and California, you need 3,000 hours. Colorado needs 2,000. You may be able to get supervised by someone that you're already working with in your school or your district. So whoever you get to supervise you, they are likely going to need to be licensed as a therapist outside of the school setting. In Colorado, that means they need to be licensed with DORA. And I had someone that I almost got as a supervisor when I was looking. He was my internship supervisor when I was working towards getting my master's in school counseling. And he thought that he could do it because he had taken and passed the NCE. And so he was a nationally certified counselor, NCC, but he did not have the LPC. So that did not work. And he didn't know that. So you, as the supervisee, may end up having to be the one to look and just make sure that whoever you're getting as a supervisor is qualified to do that. And then there may be some other qualifications or stipulations that your supervisor is going to need to meet over and above whatever their licensure is. And in the case of Colorado, for example, and California, I know, and probably some other places, you need to, as a supervisor, you need to take a certain number. In Colorado, it's 6 hours of continuing education specific to clinical supervision. And then a lot of times different states will require that a supervisor needs to have been licensed for at least 2 years, something like that, and have been working in the field. So those are a few things that you'll want to make sure if you do try to get somebody that just you already work with. But the benefits are, if you can find someone you already work with, you might not have to pay as much for that supervision, which would be really nice. You may also be able to get supervision for free from a nonprofit organization in exchange for you providing volunteer work to them. This is something that I found out about later after I'd already gotten all of my supervision hours done and accounted for. But in Colorado, for example, there's a place called the Wings Foundation, which I ended up working with after getting my license, but they also work with folks who are pre-licensed. So if you have your LPCC, you can work with them. They will give you really excellent training. They'll pay you for your time. They will give you free supervision hours, and it's a really good experience. So what Wings does in particular is they help provide facilitated groups on a weekly basis to adults who are survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And as a facilitator, their model is such that you will always have someone else that you're facilitating with, so you don't have to do it by yourself, which I think is a really great model for folks that are starting out and trying to learn these skills, so you can have somebody else that you're learning with. And then they have a really good structure to go with it, so that also makes it easier to jump in and learn what you need to learn in order to get those clinical skills under your belt. So there's other places like that. That's just one example. And then you're often going to be required to get a certain number of supervision hours in addition to those clinical hours that we were just talking about. So the bulk of your supervision hours might be individual, or you may be able to do all group or a lot of group or half group, but whatever it is, supervision is going to involve talking with your supervisor, learning from them, planning different activities or skills to build on or classes to take, and reviewing your clinical work together and really digging in there and looking at and refining your clinical skills and your practice. So those are some of the things that you will be expecting to do with your supervisor, and they will evaluate you. They will kind of be a gatekeeper for making sure that you are where you need to be in order to say, yes, I'm going to sign off on your hours and you can get your license. So then looking at the cost for supervision, a lot of times it can mirror what clinicians charge for self-pay clients. So for that hour that they're giving to you that they could have had a self-pay client, you may pay around the same amount, which could be between $120 to $200 per hour. However, I definitely think it's worth checking in with your district to see if they offer free supervision or reimbursement programs. I know some do offer those kind of things. And then whatever it is you may have to pay, it may be a small consolation, but we'll talk more about this when we get into taxes in a future video. But you can write off the amount that you're paying for supervision as a tax write-off. So before we can talk about things like accounting and taxes, we need to actually start by looking at just what goes into starting a small business in general. And that's what we're going to do in our next video. So stay tuned for that. If you found anything in this video helpful, useful, please like, subscribe, and share with others so they can find it as well. And let me know in the comments below what you thought of this video, if you have feedback or questions or other things that you want to suggest to me. Please feel free to put that there. And until next time, remember, you have options and opportunities. See you soon.